Hello. I hope you are doing well. But if you're not doing well, I'm still happy that we're here together. You know, I could sit over here and be like, "How you doing?" But I don't know if anyone's really going to be willing to say terrible. But you know, sometimes you come and do this, and like it's like hard, you know, all resistance or old things reveal themselves as painful, and other times it's like not. Sometimes it's boring. You know, it's kind of like when you're trying to encourage people and support people in doing Zen practice, you know, it's important to talk about how it can be hard, because otherwise when it's hard, people are discouraged or they think they're doing it wrong. But if you talk about how it's hard too much, then they start to think that it's supposed to be hard. And it's not supposed to be hard. That's not the idea. So like everything is included. However you are or have ever been. It's all have this context where we can just welcome it all. So I claimed that I was going to say something about faith, and I think that's true. So, you know, I used to get these, I get emails and requests, say, hey, would you like to come to this multi-faith, interfaith event? And I'd be like, yeah, whatever, delete. So I'd be like, I'm not doing faith. I don't have to do that. I don't have to go to that thing with those people who are doing whatever that faith thing is, because I'm not doing faith. I'm doing this Soto Zen thing, and that, to me, that's not about faith. So that was great. And then I got an invitation to come to an event. They were like, we're going to kind of begin to bring some people together who've been doing multi-faith work in Minnesota, and we're going to form a statewide network, the Minnesota Multi-Faith Network. And our first event will be coming together at the Dar al-Farouk Mosque in Bloomington, which is a mosque which was bombed by a white supremacist about 2 years ago. Bloomington, Minnesota is just south of where I live by a few miles. And that was motivating to me. I said, I would like to go to this multi-faith event. If I can put my body in a place to represent that I stand together with people who are in categories that cause them to be subjects of violence, then that's good. I want to go and stand there with those people. So I went there, and it was cool. And then now I do all kinds of multi-faith work. So I don't know what happened. I used to have a girlfriend who actually lived in Cleveland for a long time. She used to like to say, maybe you can get over yourself. And so just to this little degree, I was able to get over myself and I'm not a faith guy, and just be like, I do seem to be involved in what most people would understand to be a religious tradition. So I'll just go. And it's been great. It's enabled me to meet people and make connections and stand next to people when they are looking for support and solidarity. You know, we had, there was that mass shooting at a synagogue just like a year ago, and we were able to organize an event. There were thousands and thousands of people, just people streaming down the street. I actually couldn't even get in. I went to go to my friend from the Multi-Faith Network Synagogue to go be there with him, and I couldn't get in the building. So people can stand up together. Likewise, we have representatives of the indigenous spiritual tradition of the Dakota and Anishinaabe people in our network, and we have been able to do some things where we are together. Because as a white Buddhist, it's a very peculiar and privileged position. Like, I think probably there's some people who really don't like what I'm doing, like probably some evangelical Christians think it's pretty terrible. But most people are like, oh, that I hang out with, it's kind of cool, it's got a little cachet. And so I could just hang out and be like, well, this is a pleasant privilege to have. Or I could put it down and use that as an opportunity to go and stand next to someone else who is not so privileged. Another thing that's come up in this, the last thing I'll say about this little part of my about faith is I've been motivated to because like I go to the table of people from the multi-faith network, and I'm always like, the fact that I as a white man am representing diversity in this context is very strange. So I represent religious diversity, but in a lot of other regards, it's like I represent the dominant culture. So I've been really making an effort to make connections with people from Buddhist communities that are predominantly Asian, so that we can start to see them represented in this work. And that's really great because like I go and hang out with the Shin Buddhists, and if you want to talk about faith, Shin Buddhism, that's like Pure Land, is great. They're like, our practice is to chant the name of Buddha because Buddha already realized realization, and all we have to do is be grateful for that, and realization is right here. And I was like, wow, that's a different way to do it. It's not really all that different. Getting out of the way and recognizing that realization is already how things are is not that different from what we're doing right here. Anyway, so yeah, it's cool. And you know, I don't know what your attitude towards rebirth around here is. I know a lot of like white convert Buddhists who are like, well, that rebirth, that's just like some cultural accretion from those weird Asian people. But the Buddha, you know, whatever. Boy, there are a lot of Buddhists who are really into rebirth. So when I go hang out with Tibetans, I mean, they're just like full on, whoa, rebirth. It's like, wow, well, that's good to be around. That challenges my worldview in a way that I can enjoy. So anyway, it's been really valuable. And I just bring all this up because it has to do with this like faith in me. I don't want to do faith. I'm not doing faith. Ugh. Religion. Ugh. And then I come in here and I put my head on the floor and oh, Buddha, wow. I vow with all beings, thank you. How strange we are. Anyway, then the other thing is like, so I'm really this devotee of the teachings of this Buddhist teacher named Vasubandhu. And I think earlier I was citing a little section from his 30 verses on consciousness only, where he's like, you should be aware of these phenomena. And the beneficial phenomena are faith, conscience, humility, lack of desire, aversion, and delusion, energy, tranquility, carefulness, equanimity, and nonviolence. And I always get to the faith and be like, well, what is that? And then you start to dig through Buddhist texts, and in the earliest layer, 37 Aids to Enlightenment, faith occurs twice in those lists. So it shows up. And then oddly, it's very rarely, like when you have mindfulness shows up in a lot of Buddhist lists, and then it's really carefully explained how to practice mindfulness. Developmental system, samadhi is explained extensively, and faith is like, well, what are you actually talking about? And it gives you very little to go on. So that really works well for me, because then I can just come up with something that seems to work in my heart. And I have investigated what faith means in the Buddhist tradition a little bit, and I'm going to give you, this is a pretty personal take. It is rooted, I think, very solidly in the teachings of the tradition. I like to be pretty careful. I think it's a little dangerous to be excessively innovative in the way that you teach Buddhism, especially if you're like somebody from a culture that just scooped up Buddhism like 40 years ago. And just be like, well, actually, this is the way Buddhism is. It seems problematic. But so this is a little bit innovative, but I feel like it's well-rooted in the tradition. So I'm going to say that early Buddhism, the Theravadan Buddhism, the Pali Canon layer of Buddhism, the principal article of faith is that you have the power to enact liberation. That is the faith of early Buddhism. You have liberative capacity. Every being with consciousness has liberative capacity, and you should have faith in that. What's the last teaching of the Buddha? Be a lamp unto yourself, work out your liberation with diligence. What is the Four Noble Truths? The first teaching of Buddha. There's suffering, and you can do something about it. Now, people think this is really weird because, well, that's not faith. How can that be faith? But actually, If you really apply your mind and intellect to investigating the universe, you're left with nothing to stand on. Like you can deconstruct and analyze, and it's like you can claim, well, there are people who claim there's like a moral order that comes from the divine. That's cool. But it's pretty hard to make that stand up to real logical scrutiny, as many of you probably have noticed. And so if you're really nice, you can go up to people who have a deep faith in the divine and you can explain to them extensively using logic how they're wrong. I don't actually think that's very nice. Because people are trying to get through their lives. The fact that you have liberative capacity at some point will come down to belief. If you really dig. But this is the basic faith of early Buddhism, that there's suffering and you can do something about it. We say, well, that's not faith. Just remember, we all chanted the Heart Sutra, which said there's no suffering and there's no path. That is to say, there's no suffering and nothing you can do about it. So Mahayana Buddhism is going to come up with a different take. But at the bottom, this is a really important faith, to believe that you have liberative capacity. All cultures have the tendency to inculcate people with the idea that they are powerless to some degree. Certainly, our culture is really good at inculcating you with the idea that your power resides in consuming goods, and that will produce happiness for you and the people around you. I'm not convinced of this. I have not found this to be convincing. But I mean, the messaging is really intense. And you investigate your experience, you'll just notice that, like, oh, when I get that thing, it'll be great. The new phone with the new app. You get a little hungry. And then you guys see the Louis C.K. thing? He had a piece called Everything is Amazing and No One is Satisfied. It was about how, like, when they first, Louis C.K. has done some very harmful things. But this was a trenchant observation. He's like, I got on a plane and they had Wi-Fi. And that had never happened before. It was like, wow, they have Wi-Fi on planes. And I got on the plane, I got out my laptop, and I was like, unbelievable. Never had Wi-Fi on a plane. And then I went, and it was working, and then it stopped working really well. And I was like, God damn it, where's my Wi-Fi? You went from the impossible to the assumed to the expected to the frustrating in like 10 minutes. And you can see this happen all the time. I love that. This is a good one. Have you ever said, like, you go to a restaurant and you're like, they didn't bring me my tea. They didn't bring me my sandwich. They didn't bring me my hot sauce. I really like hot sauce. They didn't bring me my hot sauce. How can a thing be mine if it doesn't even exist? And yet I've made it mine, and I'm stewing in the suffering of something that I think is mine that doesn't even exist. Because no one ever made that tea. Obviously, that's why it's not here. So we have all this messaging. That is what this messaging is about, making you subject to outside forces. And this early Buddhist doctrine is that the faith that you're not subject, you're not a victim of the external circumstance, nor are you a victim of your karma. You are an agent in every single moment. There's vast suffering. Samsara is huge. And yet, you can do something. It's cool. Alice Walker, you remember the author and essayist and activist. She wrote The Color Purple. Remember that one? Alice Walker said the most common way people give up their powers by believing they don't have any. Or you ever just like, you vote in the election and then your candidate doesn't win. And then you're like, it didn't even matter. Right? Stuck on the outcome so you don't realize that you can just go do the next thing. In this moment, you have power again. You had the power to vote. You have the power to do something now. Are you going to use your power to despair? Or if there's despair, are you going to use your power to be with your despair and care about yourself? Because the thing is, this articulation of power is not about like controlling things. It's about focusing on what is driving you to do what you're doing and cultivate the ability so that what is driving you to do what you're doing is altruistic, is free from selfishness. But I think this is something that's really good to just keep coming back to. And the Bodhisattva vow, as I was talking about earlier, it's a way of articulating your power. I'm vowing, I care, I can do something. I'm part of liberation. Cool. Because it's so easy to just kind of flop, I'm on the couch and whatever. Nothing's on. Or whatever your habit is. Click, click. I got one of these. Oh, I'm just going to, no, just kidding. So this is this basic idea of faith. In early Buddhism, it's the faith that you have power, and it takes reminders. That's the way faith is. If faith didn't take all these reminders, people wouldn't be going to church. They'd be like, well, I figured out God loved me, and everything was cool, and I'm done. Why would I go back to church? That would be stupid. But whatever your faith is going to be, we're a human being, so we need like reminders. We come back together into this room and remind ourselves that our practice matters, that we have a liberative capacity. We can do something beneficial. And that what we do really matters. That a lot of the stuff we do, whether we know it or not, is actually might be harmful. And we can look at it. We don't have to judge ourselves harshly. We should just say, oh, wow, that's not helping. I want to learn to change. It feels good. Feels good. So anyway, this early Buddhist, Theravadan, Pali-Canon era faith is the faith in your capacity to enact liberation, to do something beneficial. And then the Mahayana, I will suggest, has a different take. The Mahayana literature, in practice, emphasizes what I will call a non-ideological or affective faith. That is to say, the feeling of faith. So when I think about faith, like I was inculcated with the idea, I mean, the word has a broad range of meaning. Like if I say, I have faith in you, Jeff, I don't mean that I suspect that he controls the entire universe. I'm just like, I trust that you will actually make a good cup of coffee or whatever, right? So faith has a broad range of meanings. But, so it's related to trust. But normally I associate it with believing in an idea being true. And this is what Mahayana Buddhism absolutely is not doing. So the Heart Sutra, which we all chanted, is about recognizing that any idea you have can't be ultimately true. And this is the underlying bedrock of Mahayana thought, that all ways of believing or thinking about the world are not ultimately true. So it's not going to give you a faith. I mean, you could say, well, that's a faith, but that's a little bit weird to say, because it doesn't deny that it would be helpful to have some things that you think are true. It just says they can't be ultimately true. So the faith that we're being invited into in the Mahayana tradition is the feeling of trusting what is. The feeling of trusting what is. So it's not accepting what is, or thinking what is okay, or thinking what is comes from good circumstances, or anything like that. It's just feeling a sense of peace with what is. This is actually clearly articulated in Nagarjuna's Mula Banyavaka Karika, fundamental verses of the middle way, which is generally said to be the underpinning of Mahayana philosophy. And it's like it's the really precise and accurate philosophical expression of the material in the Heart Sutra. And basically, that text, like the Heart Sutra, just takes all the basic Buddhist doctrines and says, well, look at this. It's not fundamentally true. So, and he just goes through in order, doctrine after doctrine, and says, you can't actually prove this is fundamentally true, which is a weird thing to do for a religious person. I like to tell my religious friends, you know, what I do is I get up in the morning and I chant the Heart Sutra, which is a systematic denial of the ultimate truth of all the tenets of my own religion. And they go, so in case you didn't know this, like in the Heart Sutra, the order of the material is it's going through the order of the basic doctrinal lists of early Buddhist teachings. So when we say there's no form, no sensation, no perception, no formation, and no consciousness, and one of the basic doctrines is that the totality of experience is those 5 aggregates, and it's saying, oh, they're not actually ultimately real. That's just some ideas and a way of dividing up experience that can be useful. It doesn't mean it's not useful. It just means it's not ultimately the truth. And then it just goes through and it does the same thing for the all, which I described earlier: sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and mind. That's another way of framing the totality of experience. Well, none of that's ultimately true. Now, that's really weird. I mean, that's the one I'm like, okay, that's really strange, because I'm pretty sure there's sight. But the idea that the things I'm seeing are separate from the things I'm hearing and that those are different phenomena is just a tendency of human consciousness. You know, the universe isn't dividing those things up. So we have an explanation like, well, there's an electromagnetic spectrum and then there's a vibrational spectrum and they're different. The universe is not measuring them that way. Those are tendencies the way our sense organs have to interpret the flux of reality. So the comparison I'll make is like if you're just like a dog is hearing some sound you can't hear, and be like, well, that's not real. There's all kinds of things we're perceiving in ways that are completely different. I like to imagine, it helps to think about animals. Like, think about how octopi experience the world. I'm pretty sure it's really different. Anyway, so there's this dismantling of all the ideological or cognitive ways of understanding the world. This is like this basic strategy of Mahayana Buddhism. And so that sounds like it's like no faith. But then I get into the Vasubandhu, who's like a great icon of Mahayana thought. He's like, the first beneficial mental factor that there is faith. What is that? And from my sense of the text, what you're left with is a trusting of what is. Because the reason we always cognize, the reason we're always trying to categorize and get the world into a box is we don't trust it. We don't have faith that we're going to be okay. So it's like, I'm like, shoot, well, how soon is the bell going to ring? I don't have faith that I'm going to be okay. Ooh, I hope the bell never rings. I feel great. I don't have faith that I'm going to be okay. The bell's going to take away my magical zazen peace, man. Or whatever it is, on and on. So this faith is that we can feel peace. And this is precisely, so Nagarjuna in the Mula Madhyamaka Karika is just relentless. People don't like this text because it's relentless deconstruction. Like it's also really complicated logic. But everything is like, okay, well, you think that there's suffering? Let's demonstrate it's not ultimately true. You know, you think that there's a path out of suffering? And you're like, come on, man, it's hard. But there's one affirmation in the whole text. It's like a 40-page thing or something. And at one point he says, realizing that none of these things is ultimately true is peaceful. And you're like, wait, he affirmed something. So if you really want to be picky on Nagarjuna, yay, we got to deconstruct that. But he doesn't. He doesn't. He lets there be something. And what is it? It's peaceful. You can have faith that you can let go of everything you think you have to hold on to. And there's peace. And so we can hold the two. Like there's suffering and I can do something about it. I have agency. And I feel at peace. So this is like if you were there last night, I don't like the language of acceptance because acceptance sounds too cognitive. So I'm not accepting the universe, but I feel pretty good. So the affect that I experience as a practitioner is like, it's good to be in this world, but I can do something beneficial. And I'm still engaged in samsara. So peace and realization are right here, and I can do something. Let's live together. It feels good, like a little balance. And you can also feel like when you go like really off balance, maybe you like go and you just start to get this thing in your practice where you're just like, oh yeah, all I really want to do is just sit and be really peaceful and don't mess with me. Ever the thing where you do your meditation and then you get up, you leave, and you go out in the world, and then someone comes and does something, and you're like, you're messing with my peace, man. That is evidence that you're not quite there. But the other side is, if you're like me, you care about people. This practice wakes up. It wakes up a profound and vast love for people. And then it's like, I got to go do this thing. I want to do that thing. I want to help these people. I want to show up for that. Ooh, it gets a little frantic. And when I see that starting to happen, I can just look down and be like, I'm not actually trusting the moment. I have all this energy in me that's personal energy that's churning. It's got a franticness, so I need to take care of this. Find a way to slow down. And all this theme is like really nicely reflected in the Song of the Grassroof Hermitage, because there's a lot of language about like agency. I built a grass hut, bind grasses, walk, innocent, go forward. In his other poem, he says, progress is not a matter of far and near, but you got to progress. Agency, don't give up. Don't give up. Meet the ancestral teachers. That means you should study the Dharma. Or maybe it just means you should hang out with the ancestral teachers, which is the people in this space. Because we are the embodiments of the tradition now. But anyway, there's a lot of active agent language. But then there's also this language of like complete non-doing. That's where we also see there's kind of a Taoist thing sneaking in underneath in the Mahayana side of non-doing way. But living here, he no longer works to get free. Faith. The original master is present. Whether you think you're dying or not, what does he say? Great vehicle bodhisattva, trust without doubt, the middling or lowly can't help wondering, will this hut perish or not? To trust without doubt. Can I be free of even wondering whether I'm going to die or not? I think so. To really trust. Perishable or not, the original master is present. Buddha's here. What does that mean? Well, in simplest terms, when the Buddha attained realization under the Bodhi tree, from the Mahayana perspective, what Buddha realized and what made a person named Siddhartha Gautama into Buddha is that he realized that he was there as an agent in the world who wasn't separate from anything. By the way, those things don't make logical sense real well. But he said, I alone, with all beings, realize enlightenment and touch the earth. Agency, and yet wholeness. And if what it means for Buddha to be Buddha is that Buddha is not separate from anything, that means you can't not be Buddha. It's too late. It's too late to get out of being Buddha. I'm sorry. Because all Buddha is that everything is interdependent. You can't leap from that, no matter how much we feel like we have, because we don't want the responsibility, or we feel ashamed, so we feel somehow we're wrong. Finally, our being apart is always here. Okay, thank you. So I remain interested in hearing other people say things. Yeah.
So this is a personal question. I'm a yoga teacher, and sometimes I have my class stand on their mat and spread their arms wide and their fingers, lift their heart, look up. And I say to them, trust in the universe, be receptive to all that it has to offer. And I'm wondering if some better words might be trust in what is.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they both work. I like both kinds of language, and they're similar. So you're noticing that they're similar. And I think the cool thing is to just keep playing with the language. So my problem is I'll get a little thing that I think is cool to say, and then I start saying it. And then you get a little stuck. And then I need the Heart Sutra, you know? So I think you should try it. But then it's like keep that ball rolling. Keep that ball of investigation of what that means and how people are responding rolling. But yes, trusting universe, trusting what is. In a way, to me, my invitation is more like, can you trust what is? Or, because someone might really not. And then that's also to be honored. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In your definition of faith, you made it clear that it felt like maybe that didn't include rebirth. You kind of made that clear, and then later on, you said, there's no. I don't remember exactly. I don't want to put words in. You said like no karma. There is no karma either, and you said rebirth is really embedded in a lot of the, especially Tibetan religion. But karma is even deeper embedded in most of the practices. What's your take on the karma aspect?
Well,
Or is there any?
I have I'm into karma. I think karma is a very useful principle. And in fact, I think without karma, it's very hard to make Buddhism make sense in terms of a lot of the doctrines. Because most people in this room probably are materialists. That is, we believe that the universe is made of matter that's real. In fact, like when I say that, you might even not be able to understand what I mean because it's so embedded in how you believe reality is that describing it doesn't make sense. But the idea that the universe is made of matter that's real is non-Buddhist. And Buddhism does not affirm it, which is really freaky. And this is why karma is important. From a materialist perspective, whether we suffer or not is dependent on how matter is operating. So, like, when matter operates like this, and I'm like, that doesn't feel good, that's suffering. And I could be like, well, yeah, but it's in my brain, but your brain is creating the suffering. So the point being that cause and effect are determined by matter. And my guess is most people in this room believe this to be true, which is cool. It's a useful and valuable way of looking at the world. But from the Buddhist perspective, cause and effect is karma as far as what really matters. And that is because they want to take the emphasis on something which is disempowering, which is believing that matter is controlling us and put it into a empowered position, which is karma, is something we are participating in. Karma means intentional acts. So Buddha says very specifically, karma is intention. So that is to say, whether suffering occurs in the world or not is dependent on the attitude with which we do things. So you might be like, well, that's a ridiculous worldview. It doesn't make sense. But the point is to put the power into your hands. This is back to my original point, to recognize that every single moment you are contributing intentionally to the world of suffering or non-suffering. And so if what you do with your intentionality is say, oh, I'm believing in a material reality and I'm becoming a scientist, that's cool. It's totally cool. It doesn't prove that the world is made of matter. It's something that you've chosen to do and should be judged on whether it's effective at promoting happiness. So the point of karma is to bring your worldview down to the point of recognizing that the way you look at the world and the way you feel about it is where you have agency for enacting liberation. Because Buddhism isn't interested in anything but whether they're suffering or not. Is that like too abstruse?
No. I'm with that. I got it.
Yeah. So I don't come from this from the perspective that like karma is ultimately true, because actually it's already also denied in Mahayana literature that it's ultimately true. It's a way of looking at the world that shifts our perspective away from manipulating external reality and into agency within the system of suffering and non-suffering. That's what it's for.
I was just wondering how we were just saying jives with what you were saying earlier about so the karma is like gives you a sense of control or agency. Earlier, maybe something about like true non-violence is totally letting go of all control. A bit.
Paradoxical.
Welcome to Zen.
Well, in a sense, this has to do with these two kinds of faith or these two polarities that I'm kind of making up to some degree, but it's embedded in the literature. Theravadan literature emphasizes this active, liberative capacity, and the Mahayana literature is going to emphasize this deconstructive, non-doing, radical peace with what is. And I think they're best together. That comes from my Yogacara training, because that's what Yogacara is about, is integrating the two. Another way to like kind of resolve or play with the paradox is the most powerful thing you can do is to engage in cultivating nonviolence. And that begins with like being nonviolent towards yourself and your direct environs. And that then what you're doing karmically is you're putting nonviolence into the system of the world. But then there's like this paradox of at some point that engaging in radical nonviolence is a kind of a non-doing. And those two things do sit in like it's like, well, they don't exactly overlap. So it's like the idea is to hold them both and to recognize which viewpoint will be most beneficial or skillful from the position you're in. But this idea that nonviolence relating to karma, so in the letter from Birmingham jail, Dr. King writes, I'm cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham, because we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. So he recognizes that everything's connected, and because of that, he has to act. And the choice that he makes to act is to just go where there is violence and be nonviolent. That's what I'm interested in getting people to do. And you do it with yourself, because you come in here and you see that you want to get yourself to be this way or that. So you go, that's a violence that's conditioned in your consciousness. You go right into that and you begin to insert something more nonviolent in it in relationship to yourself in Zazen. But this also we can do in the public sphere. And I'll just say the proof one more time. You recognize everything is connected. you start to feel that you must act, and the action is to go where there's harm and be non-harming. You might be like, well, there's not that much harm in here, but we're a little hard on ourselves. And if maybe you're not hard on yourself, you sit around and you're like, man, my zazen is flipping dope. Look at this. This is great. That's not nonviolent either. So, realize connection. Slow down, practice trusting what is, Mahayana faith, and recognize that you have the power to come back and keep doing that. Because it takes a little juice, doesn't it? You're like, oh, I got to get to zazen. That's your power. You use your power to show up and shed your power. Or recognize that you're just already here with everything. And it's like a cycle. That's why Shurto says, turn around the light to shine within, then just return. It's a wheel. All right, any other voices?
We can't let this pass without bringing up free will now, can we?
Oh, wow.
That's our argument.
That's just in connection with faith.
So, the question is, if everything is interconnected and subject to we have a difference of opinion on whether there's any such thing as free will.
Well, you can hold forth, or I'm pretty familiar with the argumentation. It's like basically if everything's interdependently arising, what appears to be free will is just a product of infinite conditions and it's not free will. On the other hand, come on, man, I'm making a choice to talk, right? So, yeah, it's confusing. This is a conundrum which is, in my opinion, never resolved successfully in Buddhist discourse. That's my current take. And they don't put their finger on it as free will. They don't use that term, but it exists in the literature and it's fundamental to the question I'm bringing up here about faith. You have power. The thing is, Buddhism will not deny free will as at least a skillful means in teaching. Why? Because the whole point of Buddhism is that there's suffering and you can do something about it. So the whole purpose of the tradition is eliminated if we're not going to include skillful means as free will as a way of looking at things. But it doesn't mean it's ultimately true.
And that's where the faith comes in.
Yes!
We're wired to have faith, and that wiring is connected intimately to free will. We're just created. We have to act as if we have free will, even though we go through the analysis, the practice, we recognize it's not real, but we come right back again and we act as if it is. It's kind of like out of faith. I have faith in free will, even though I know it's not right. It's not real.
That's exactly the argument that I began the talk with. That the faith in your liberative agency that early Buddhism presents is a faith for the reason you just laid out.
Yeah.
In case, right? It's like, but don't give up that faith. Please do not give up that faith. This is the underpinning of Buddhism. You have something beautiful to offer. You don't have to make a fancy painting. Just the way you are with the things you meet in any given moment. Thank you. Our intention equally penetrate every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to rehaunt.